I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting, and dirty, because it has been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. More than by fear of going astray, my hope is that we will be moved by the fear of remaining shut up within structures which give us a false sense of security, within rules which make us harsh judges, within habits which makes us feel safe. With these words, these are not my words, unfortunately, but with these words, the current head of the Catholic Church appealed to the members of the Catholic community to resurface the residual founding methodology, not mythology, methodology of the true nature of Christ's body. This appeal to get away from authoritarian approaches and ecclesial centrism, which in its peculiar way dominated various Christian churches and still dominates various Christian churches, seems to have grown into a certain dynamics within the contemporary theological circles in search for the balance between infinite and intimate. The dynamics which in many ways resembles the spirit of the Moscow local council of 1718. This search is essentially about a need to rediscover the authenticity of the nature of Christian community and its common and public services, diaconia, kerygma, and liturgia, its heritage and fidelity to the tradition, which stimulates for further growth. In this short presentation, through the lens of a social, ethical, theological perspective, I would like to make an attempt to bring these dynamics into our contemporary context and reflect on how one of the most rapidly growing phenomena, Christian fundamentalism, becomes a challenge to the ecclesial and liturgical authenticity and integrity. In choosing between no religion and another kind of religion, many contemporary people, mostly young people, however, seem to be more inclined toward clean and safe theology, sober, nearly sterile liturgical practices, and strict and clear guidelines of moral behavior, the hard gospel. Christian religious fundamentalism rapidly becomes a preferred option for many, often as a means to regain security in the rapidly changing social environment. Christian religious fundamentalism is a growing movement which arose in American Protestantism in the late 19th century, in reaction to theological liberalism and cultural modernism, which aimed to revise traditional Christian beliefs to accommodate new developments in the natural and social sciences, especially the advent of the theory of biological evolution. Christian fundamentalism is often associated with a rigid literalism that wrenches a text from the context of a passage in sacred scripture and the living tradition of the church. Yet, there is much more to this than merely literally rigidity. Christian religious fundamentalism is a double-edged sword, really. On the one hand, it claims to protect Christian faith from the corruption of modernism by the means of going back to the roots and proposing seemingly sound solutions to contemporary issues. On the other hand, it creates its own reality, sets own rules, and designs new ideology. Often, it turns out to be a mere shortcut to knowledge, an exclusive and uncritical reliance on some authoritative tradition for obtaining true knowledge in all important matters, and thus to claim to be better than the others. During his concluding address after the three-country tour of Africa in November 15, Pope Francis called fundamentalism a sickness and idolatry, explaining it as, we Catholics have some, not some, many, who believe they possess the absolute truth, and go ahead dirtying the other with calumny and disinformation and doing evil. Religious fundamentalism must be combated. It's not religious. God is lacking. It's idolatrous. He was speaking about Catholic fundamentalism, but I can equally apply this to other Christian denominations. What does this Christian religious fundamentalist view have to do with the liturgy? Christian fundamentalism is not merely about the oversimplified differences between liberal and conservative, or about an unnecessary dichotomy between truth and mercy, science and belief, or secular world evil and God's kingdom good, as many discussions on fundamentalism seem to suggest. Consequently, it's not about the hard gospel or a moral right to dissent from the official teaching of the Church. The main focus of this phenomenon in my contribution today is on an almost fragile aspect of Christianity, so profoundly revealed and present in liturgy, yet so frequently overlooked by a loud rhetoric, the challenge of incarnation, or in other words, liturgical integrity. Liturgy is celebration of the encounter of a human person with living God, and through that, with other human beings, natural environment, bridging past and future. As such, liturgy must reflect the dialogue of life, be sensitive to particular social context, while at the same time integrate and move beyond styles and contexts, beyond rituals, beyond church buildings and carefully defined denominations. Anything less than that runs a danger of becoming a celebration of the ritual itself. Liturgical and sacramental fundamentalism, or what I have come to call liturgical fetishism, disintegrates liturgy from a daily life and creates a parallel reality, an escape into a quasi-better world. It thus monopolizes the dynamics of liturgy and leads to a real gnosis that is at times apologetical, defensive really, and reduced to a subset of theological axioms. It reduces Christian worship to a mere following of proper rubrics by which its quality is usually defined. In one way or another, it puts choreography before mysterion and alters this mystical liturgical reality, which is by its nature theandric, global, and universalizing. The question indeed is whether the integrity of liturgy can survive or be effective in a pluralist environment by returning solely to the reliance of the received tradition. How, in other words, can we maintain liturgical integrity in a pluralistic society without falling into religious fundamentalism or reducing liturgy to personal dynamics in a pseudo-solidarism? A possible answer to this challenge might be found in the quest for sound anthropology as a basis for liturgical theology. As liturgy has an inherently social character, it is only through the help of positive, ascending anthropology, where a person is seen in close interconnection with God and the other, that we can overcome the dichotomy between thought and action, rhetoric and reality. This is essential for both accounts, to understand and explain liturgy, and to understand the ways by which human persons may more adequately enter into the paschal mystery through the liturgy. What happens after we leave God's table? Liturgy stops? How does liturgy engage the kind of society in which we live? Can it become the way of life? William Everett once observed that the liturgies of sport, university, and media triad have become liturgies of our societies, liturgies without the church. In some cases, people gathered to watch football together constitute a much closer unity than those who gather to pray in the same church. The problem of empty churches lays often in the problem of empty liturgies, rituals which fail to embrace the challenge of incarnation. Liturgy begins when people gather for the common action facing same direction with the profound desire for the common good. It continuously creates and recreates a community into which it incorporates individuals, and reactualizes moments of sacred history in a way that opens them to active participation and concrete action in the society. It is a criteriological activity, which by its very nature brings judgment on a particular social order. The ecclesial community lives in the world, as part of the world, continuously expressing its interdependence with the agencies and conditions of the life of its people. With its purposes and competences, the Church is indeed different from the secular society, but it's not opposed to it. The concern for liturgical integrity, therefore, presses for a holy community, a new kind of society, rather than for a holy person as an antidote for a fallen secular world. The concern here, however, is not so much about a connection between liturgy and social justice. The connection is deep and intrinsic indeed. The problem is rather with gnosticizing the liturgy, which is by its very nature a social realm, and making it about meaning that individuals digest in church and then go out into the wider world to translate it into social action individually. The argument, though, demands a preliminary reflection on what we mean by social realm, and in particular of its concrete implications in liturgical ethics. In her Human Condition, Hannah Arendt rethought social in terms of a world held in common by equals, who, by abandoning their self-centered interests, speak and act towards each other about matters that concern them all. Schillebeeckx emphasized that this world is a pattern of conventions that enable human-human encounter through God right from human experience, encounter maintained by liturgy. The social realm is therefore found not in the concept, but in the sets of relationships. It is a way of interaction, not only with the Supreme Being, in which individuals, very often unrelated individuals, can participate. Liturgical preparation gives rise to narratives, not the imitation, repetition, or even interpretation of stories, but truly a participation of continuous writing of shared narrative, grounded in shared memories and oriented towards future, a mysterion. In this way, not only do we rehearse the narratives of past actions in liturgy, we furthermore project new scenarios to test the judgments of the public realm. Christian liturgical ethics is ethics of the Great Supper, as it is in Eucharistic assembly, not in private prayer or contemplation, that judgment, repentance, reconciliation, and God's love are experienced in their full kingdom signification. The shape of pedagogy, which is required there to be an authentic Christian ethics, which challenges the world with the standards of the kingdom, is nothing else than the shape of the liturgy. As such, liturgy is a continuous reality that celebrates human existence in God's presence, and so transforms the social community. Good liturgy that culminates at the table of the Lord, which liberates the participants from the slavery of sin, dead traditions, and distorted image of God, never stops. It continues from the altar to the daily table, becoming the true liturgy of the world. In the last decades of the 20th century, Catholic theological discourse seemed to grow more into the direction of uniting the focal aspects of the Church as moral community around the Eucharist, testifying the Church's self-perception through the union between sacraments, liturgy, and morality. Being built on the Eucharist, that is essentially the redemptive self-gift of Christ in the form of his body given with love to the others. The Church, as the Eucharistic community, implies that Christ's followers are to be gifts for the nourishment of the others. When the practice of the Eucharist is central in our life of the Church, the breaking and sharing of bread is a critique of the present organization of the hungry social body. The divine reality breaks into human history in the ways in which the members of the Christ body conceive the meaning of the nourishment and their own identity in relation to the hunger of the others. The church is the church when it exists for the others. Like the Eucharist itself, the bodies of the church members are food for the nourishment of the world, to be broken, shared, and consumed. Such understanding of the church as the Eucharistic community that also lays at the heart of liberation theology marks, according to James Nikolov, an ecclesial shift from moral exhortation to solidarity, from rhetorics to practice. In the Eucharistic meal, eating is a radically public communal act. The economic and political boundaries, and here I use those words in their original meaning, in sense of a norm of household, the economic, and whatever constitute the philosophical and theological discourse on the polis, on the dynamism of life in society, political. So the economic and political boundaries, normally restricted to the family, are extended in Eucharist to the orphan, stranger, migrant, and hungry. There was a dramatic inversion in Eucharistic theology that drew my attention to for this argument. Patristic and early medieval tradition, using the Pauline images of the body of Christ, spoke of the sacramental body of the Eucharist as corpus mysticum, or the mystical body of Christ, and the church as corpus verum, or the true body of Christ. Around the 12th century, however, there was an inversion of meaning. In the following centuries, the sacramental body of Eucharist was increasingly seen as Christ's corpus verum, and the church, its corpus mysticum. As corpus verum, the Eucharistic host became an object of reverence, rather than the center of communal performance. A shift was in progress in which the emphasis was increasingly placed upon the miracle of transubstantiation in the priest's blessing of the bread and wine, making the Eucharist more an object than an action that transformed the community itself. And it is right here, at the core of our Christian belief, that religious fundamentalism becomes most vivid. Full, or I rather prefer complete, communion between various Christian denominations is still practically impossible. Our liturgy, so beautifully defined as a celebration of union between God and human beings, becomes a real test to ecumenical liturgical unity. My conclusions. A fear of modernism and the secular sphere has contributed greatly to the development of fundamentalism and the Church's defensive attitude towards secular society and any change it might bring. It is unfortunate that particularly now, when the Church's prophetic presence is so needed, ecclesial communities have allowed themselves to become more and more peripheral. By proposing seductively simple answers to complex political, economic, moral, and pastoral issues, the Church risks confirming this irrelevance and further extending the gap between its proclamation and practice. It is rarely possible to solve new concerns with all methodologies. Today, we need to find new approaches that combine a better understanding of ourselves and of our foundations, with a deep and profound interest in the other. It is in this context that liturgy needs to be recognized as an embodiment and realization of reconciliation and God's mercy. The age of sterile, disputatious theology is past. We are in urgent need of a more inclusive, more complex, and a more historically tuned approach to ecclesial matters. Today, when faced with serious social concerns such as migration and refugee crisis, poverty, we need to learn to be gift to the other and accept the other as a gift. To let this be a witness against contemporary materialism in full liturgical sense. This gift is what we as human beings most need from each other. If the incarnation, God's ultimate gift to us, so beautifully celebrated in our liturgies, is about crossing over the divine-human divide, our role as believers should be in incarnating the cross over the human divide. It is ultimately a mission of living out our liturgy, of reconciliation and building a civilization of love. Not a mere activism, but as a genuine testimony to God's undivided, unrestricted, and universal love to humankind, a passionate concern for the common good of all. Thank you.